For this tape, we're going to investigate the life and the thoughts of probably the most influential philosopher in all of history. Now, Socrates was a big name, and we'll look at other big names. But I think it was Alfred North Whitehead who said that the entirety of the history of philosophy is simply a footnote to Plato. Plato is a giant among giants. Not so much because what he said is any more or less true than anyone else. In fact, he had some really kind of out there kind of ideas, as we'll see. But the main reason why Plato was such a giant among giants in philosophy is that he was the first, at least the first that we know of, who brought together a complete systematized sort of collection of ideas that sought to integrate all the entirety of human experience and knowledge under one sort of umbrella, interpretive umbrella. And so he was really the first one in history that we see doing that. Now, there will be others who come after him, and those who come after him usually have to either agree with him and then maybe expound or add to his theories, or they disagree with him, and some in a very sharp way. But nonetheless, even those great ones who are found disagreeing with him, such as his very own student Aristotle, we'll see him next. But even people like Aristotle have to deal with what Plato originally laid down, and so much of the history of philosophy really is a response to some of the things that Plato introduced. Now, Plato, in the body of work that survives from Plato, it runs the gamut from metaphysics to epistemology to ethics and beyond, even in various, touching upon every aspect there. So we're going to look at some of what he thought. Of course, again, like as with any of these lectures, much more could be said about Plato. We're going to hit some highlights, but I do encourage you to go ahead and read the text because you'll go a little bit more in depth there. So anyway, Plato was a student of Socrates. He was one of Socrates' fans who followed him around, one of his disciples or his students who followed Socrates around. The difference between Socrates and Plato, however, is that Plato eventually wrote down the things that he thought. He wrote them down and made records of them in this sort of thing, whereas Socrates never really left anything, at least none that we have surviving, any manuscripts for later generations. So anyhow, but he's a student of Socrates, very much an advocate for Socrates. He believes in what Socrates represents. He seeks to carry on Socrates' traditions. And he's, one would think, especially since the way that he writes of him, that probably Plato was very fond of Socrates, maybe even looked up to him as a beloved mentor. In fact, after Socrates is put to death, Plato ends up sort of leaving the country and traveling abroad, finding other schools of philosophy to encounter. We have a good reason to believe that he might have come into contact, for example, with the Pythagoreans. And so anyway, Plato was kind of a traveled philosopher as well. Well, anyway, he makes his way back to Athens, and he starts up a school of his own. You see, Plato was from an aristocratic family. He was apparently well-to-do and had means in order to support himself and carry on his ventures. This is probably why much of his manuscripts survive. Probably he was able to accumulate to himself a library, or at least a study, to where he could write these things down, and as he would teach them, have them recorded for posterity. Now, Plato returns to Athens after traveling abroad, and he starts a school. The school is known as the Academy, which basically is the word that we use for schools today, academies, but it's known as the Academy. People come there to study. There is a large following, probably that included a lot of the followers of Socrates, but certainly even the next generation of philosophy students join in and study at the Academy. Those are just a few things about Plato. and a history of him. Not a whole lot other than that is known about him. His name, by the way, means broad. And there's also much evidence to show that Plato might have been a wrestler, kind of a big guy. So if you can think of a philosopher who's also into MMA, that sort of thing, that's who Plato was. He was kind of a big guy, and yet very well thought out and employed his reason and so forth. Anyhow, so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that Plato taught. Now, to understand Plato, and we'll start with his metaphysic, his understanding of the world, ultimate reality, and existence. Plato believed that the world actually, that all of reality is formed, or all of reality basically exists in two worlds. So if you think Plato, think two worlds. There's what Francis Schaeffer, a philosopher of the 20th century, calls the upper story and then the lower story. And for Plato believed in the world, the material world, and that's the world that we live in, the world that we experience. That you and I live in these material bodies, we interact with matter all day long in the material world. And that would have been the lower story. That's the world of experience, the world of senses, or sensory perception, and that kind of thing. But in addition to the world of matter, or the material world, there is also what Plato would refer to as the world of the forms. The world of the forms. Now, when we first bring this up, a lot of times people have in mind, when the term world of the forms is used, people have in mind that we're talking about an extraterrestrial planet of some kind. And in addition to Earth, there's another world out there, or a planet out there, that Plato refers to as the world of the forms. But that's not at all what he's talking about. The world of the forms, he does believe exists, but it's not an extraterrestrial world. The forms are conceptual. They are ideas. It's not. They have no material existence. They are non-material. And so the world of the forms necessarily transcends the material world. The world of the forms, and then there's the world of matter. Now, the two interact in such a way that the world of the forms, or ideas, gives meaning to the world of matter. And so it's kind of like this. The world, if I have a chair that's sitting in front of me, and let's say that the chair is made out of wood, it's made out of wood and steel and vinyl on it. Okay, well, what is it about that chair, the shape of the chair? Is it the shape of the chair? What is it about that chair that allows me to recognize it as a chair? Because chairs come in all sizes and shapes. And ultimately, as it relates to matter, that chair can be described in reference to the component materials that it's made of. What makes that hunk of metal and wood and vinyl, excuse me, what makes that a chair, and another hunk of wood, metal, and vinyl a couch, for example? Well, the meaning of the thing, according to Plato, is not inherent in the object, the material object. The meaning of the thing is inherent in the idea that we put behind it. We look at that object, that collection of matter, and we call it a chair. We could as easily call it, by another word, but we call it a chair, and that chair has meaning. And the meaning of that chair is wrapped up not in the hunk of matter itself. It is wrapped up, the meaning is wrapped up in our mind. It's wrapped up in the idea of chair. And so therefore we can look at many different sizes and shapes of chairs, and whether they're made of plastic, or whether they're made of metal, whether they're made of wood, or whether they're carved out of granite, whatever. We can look at chairs, no matter the shape, the size, the material composition, and we can understand, because the idea that we have in our mind, there is meaning given to that material object, and the meaning of chair is imbued to it from our minds. Now, the world of the forms consists of ideas, whereas the world of matter consists of matter, basically matter. The world of the forms gives meaning, whereas the world of matter the material world in and of itself is meaningless. There's no inherent meaning to things on the earth. They only receive meaning when they reflect one of the forms. The world of the forms are eternal. They don't change. They've existed from eternity past, and will exist continually, unchanging and unchanged into the future. Whereas the world of matter is temporal. Things change here all the time. Not only do people age, and therefore they go through development and change, but matter itself is always changing, kind of like Heraclitus talked about. You see, Plato is trying to integrate the various philosophies that have come before him. Whereas Heraclitus says everything changes, Parmenides says nothing changes. Plato says, I see that you both have some really good points here. How can we integrate all of this understanding into one? And that's what he's trying to do. And so the world of the forms, that is objective. It exists outside of this material world. The world of the matter, the material world, is subjective. It takes on meaning as each one of us views certain parts of it, and we give meaning to it. The world of the forms has meaning, and the meaning that is inherent to the world of the forms, we can't change that. It exists as it is. We access the world of the forms through reason. So there's the rationalist sort of coming out. And we access the world of matter, or the material world, through our physical senses. And there's the empiricist coming out. So Plato is trying to combine all of these various philosophies that have come before and say, yes, there's merit to each one of them in certain ways. We need to integrate them so that we can make sense of the whole of existence. For example, can we reason and come to knowledge? Well, certainly we can. So Plato believes that the world of the forms is necessary in order for us to be able to know anything through reason. But can we also come to knowledge through examining things with our physical, empirical senses? Well, certainly we can. Plato understands that as well, and so he wants to have a facet or a place rather for being able to arrive at knowledge through physical senses, and that is the material world. We interact with the material world on the basis of physical senses. So what Plato is trying to do is just to integrate the whole of our experience and come up with a philosophy that explains it or interprets it well for us. So there's the world of the forms, and then there's the world of matter, or the material world. Now, we live at the same time in both realms. And Plato believes that we understand, or we know things about the material world because the objective world of the forms gives us that knowledge. That's his understanding there. Now, he gives an allegory of this to maybe illustrate the point. And this particular allegory is very famous. Anybody who teaches on Plato will include this allegory in their teaching. However, it's often misunderstood. The allegory is not about some sort of religious experience. The allegory is not about, it's not about sort of a eureka, I have found it moment. The allegory is a metaphysical statement that Plato is making. And what he is essentially saying is that if we dwell in the world of matter, in the material world only, and if we concern ourselves only in the concepts of the material world, then we haven't really fully embraced the entirety of what life is about. And we will not reach true wisdom, and we will live in a world that is a world of shadows. More on that in just a minute. What we need to do is to escape the idea that we can only come to knowledge through examining the material world. We need to use reason to access the world of the forms, and then interpret all things in light of the forms that are out there. That then and only then can we really truly arrive at wisdom and knowledge and developing our souls and becoming virtuous people. So here's the analogy of the cave. Plato says, imagine this. Imagine this is basically how the world works. Imagine, if you will, a cave in which there are prisoners chained to the wall. And these prisoners are locked into their prison in such a way that they cannot move their arms or their feet. Their arms and feet are chained. And there is a chain or a lock that is keeping their head in one place so they can only see what's directly in front of them. They cannot turn their head either way, one way or the other, to see what's beside them or around them. All that they can see is what is directly in front of them. And so that's the entirety. They've been that way since birth. That's the entirety of their existence, and that's all that they know. And let's say there are 5 or 6 of them chained up there. Now, behind the prisoners, a little bit above and behind them, there is a raised wall where people and objects sort of are paraded across this raised wall, a path behind them. And behind them, there's a fire that's been emblazoned. And that fire is casting a shadow of the people and objects that are being paraded across this walkway behind them, such that all that they see are the shadows on the wall. And so a camel, for example, will go and walk behind them, and they will smell the camel, they will hear the camel, but they'll see the shadow of a camel on the wall. And they'll come up with a word for the camel, the shadow that they see. And so they call it a camel. And they believe, because their experience testifies to them, that shadow is actually the camel. Well, somebody will parade a musical instrument, and they're playing the musical instrument as it's being paraded. And the people who are chained, the prisoners who are chained, are looking on the wall behind them, or in front of them rather, and they see the shadow of this person playing a musical instrument as he's playing it, and they come up with a name for that musician. And so they believe that the shadow is the substance and the total of that musician. And so on and so on and so on. With everything that's paraded behind them, they begin to think that thing, whatever that thing is the actual thing in and of itself. And so the prisoners live their life in this cave in such a way that all that they ever know and all that they ever experience are the shadows. That is until one day, one of the prisoners is set free. And that prisoner is taken up into the outside world. And at first, that prisoner is startled because of the sunlight. And they've grown up, they've seen nothing since they were a child. They've seen nothing but the darkness of the cave. And his eyes are acclimated to the darkness of the cave. And now that he's outside, the sunlight hurts his eyes. And it takes quite a while for him to get used to that. And he get used to the sunlight that just burns him. But as soon as he does, he begins to look around in the world around him, and he sees things for what they really are. And he sees the camels that go by, and he realizes, wait a minute, this kind of looks like the shadow that I saw, the shadow on the wall. But the shadow on the wall isn't actually the camel. The camel is actually the camel. This beast, this three-dimensional thing that I can touch and I can feel. It has more body to it. It has more substance to it, and so on. And he goes along, and he hears a person playing music, and he looks over there and he sees the person playing music, and all of a sudden he says, well, that's the musician that I saw the shadow on the wall, and it was nothing more than a shadow, but this is the reality that is behind that shadow, this musician. And he begins to realize that all the shadows that he had seen paraded in front of him while he was growing up in this world of shadows, in this world in the cave, all of these things were nothing more than just a reflection or a shadow from the real thing which cast the shadow. In fact, as he begins to look around, he realizes that his body even casts a shadow. And he sees what his shadow looks like. But he realizes the nature of the connection between the real thing and the shadow. And he is overjoyed. He's overjoyed with his newfound description. And then he goes back. He goes back to his friends who he grew up with in the cave. The prisoners that are still there and still locked up. Now imagine if he went back to them and he tried to explain to them, what you see in front of you is not real. What you see in front of you is simply a shadow. And how would he even explain to them what a shadow was? How would he even explain to them that the shadow is cast by the body of a real thing? That the camel is not the shadow on the back of the wall. The camel is actually a beast, a camel in and of itself. It has a body. It's more than this flickering light. You know what? One of the funny things about it, or the ironic things about it, would be this. Once he went back in there and he began to discuss with the people who were still in prison there about what a shadow was, he wouldn't be able to see the shadows as well as they could because his eyes would be acclimated to the light. He wouldn't be settled to be content with explaining terms and simply in relationship to the flickering of light and the shadows. He would at all times trying to convince his friends that, look, this is not the real world. This is not the way it is. You need to come with me and get out of this place. And you need to go to the world. It'll hurt at first, but your eyes will hurt at first. But as soon as your eyes adjust to it, you'll be able to see perfectly fine what the real world is like, and so on and so on. Plato talks about this. And he says, what would those prisoners do if they could to that person? Surely they would think that he was crazy. They would think that he was raving mad because the world, as far as they knew it, was simply defined by the shadows. They would take him, and if they could, they would get their hands on him, they would kill him. And of course, that's a reference to Socrates, because Plato believes that Socrates, through the use of reason, had gone to the outer world, had understood the true nature of reality, had brought it back for people to understand and to see. And because they did not want to go into the light, because they did not believe him, they killed him. But this is a metaphysical statement that Plato is making. He's saying, look, outside of this material world that we live in, there is a world of the forms. And the world of the forms is a world that is perfect. It is permanent. It has meaning. It's the world of ideas. And it's from this world of ideas that we sort of mold this material world into the shape that we want it to be like. And we give meaning to this material world. Other than that, this world would have no meaning whatsoever. It would be too chaotic. So that's Plato's understanding of the world of the forms and the world of the material world. He relates it as related through his allegory of the cave. Now, just to maybe kind of get a little bit at this idea of the forms and the material world, if you think about yourself, think if you had been stranded on a desert island, or not a desert island, but a tropical island. You're in the middle of the tropics. You're alone on this island. The island seems to be big enough to survive on until somebody can come rescue you. Well, what do you have there to work with? Well, you really don't have a whole lot of anything. I mean, there are trees, there are vines, there are rocks, but not a lot there to survive with. So what do? Well, you begin to fashion, take what's on hand. Maybe you break down some trees and you form up a shelter, and you create this shelter in order to have a place to live and be protected by from the elements. And so you take that matter, which really has no meaning in and of itself, and you use the idea in your mind on how to construct a shelter. You build the shelter so that you can live. And what did you do in order to give meaning to the matter that you found in the world around you? Well, you used ideas. And ideas come from your mind. And that's what Plato's talking about here. We shape this world according to our ideas. This world is meaningless other than that. But we take from this world and we shape it in such a way because of our ideas that we have. Maybe you're stranded on this island and you want to take and write something on the ground, so if any planes are going overhead, they see a message. And so you cut down a bunch of trees, or you just get a bunch of logs and you arrange them in the form of the word help, and you put it out on the beach so that any planes flying overhead will see the word help spelled out. Well, does the log have the meaning of the word help? No. Does the sand? No. But using the idea that you have in your mind, Using the idea, you take and you shape and you form the world in which you live in order for it to suit your needs. Things in the world have no meaning in themselves. They only have meaning as we use ideas to give meaning to them. So that's really what Plato is getting at. Now, this world of ideas, this world of forms, if you will, and that's really what the forms are. They're concepts, they're ideas. This world of the forms is a world that Plato believes is eternal, it's unchanging. And so for every chair that we see here, there is a perfect chair form in the world of the forms. And the world of the forms is you might think of it maybe as an extra dimensional world. It's the world that gives meaning to us. Now, how then do we access the world of the forms? How do we know that? Well, Plato believes, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, he believes that all knowledge is remembering. And what that means is Plato believes that you and I, before we came into this world and were born into this world in our bodies, you and I pre-existed this world, and we were in the world of the forms. Our soul was in the world of the forms, and it knew all things. It was familiar with all the forms. It knew all about them. However, when we came to this world, our soul was encased in matter. That's our body, right? Our soul was encased in matter, and in the process of this imprisonment of our soul in the matter of our bodies, our soul was sort of cut off from the world of the forms. It forgot. It's kind of like an amnesia, if you will. And so here we are. We are a material body, which is a soul that is imprisoned in this body of matter, and in order to arrive at knowledge, what we need to do is we need to use reason and contemplation in order to get back to and remember what we already knew from the time that our soul was in the world of the forms. And so all knowledge is remembering, Plato believes, and he sets out to try to prove this by he goes up to a slave who was a young man. He was uneducated, unlearned, and he was talking to this slave. And before long, just by asking a few leading questions, he demonstrates that this slave knows in his day what amounts to advanced geometry. What he did basically was he got him to articulate the Pythagorean theorem. And the person with whom Plato is speaking, or in the dialogue, it's actually Socrates that's speaking. The person with whom he's speaking is like, wow, even this unlearned slave, is able to do advanced geometry. He knows it already. Therefore, yes, all knowledge must be remembering. By the way, for the rationalists, the school of rationalism, this is one thing that we see arising all the time, and depending on who it is. I mean, Plato, we see that. Descartes talks about it, and so forth. Leibniz. They talk about this idea of innate ideas that we are somehow born with. This knowledge, this body of knowledge, it's different than instincts, right? Instincts are just sort of things that enable us for animal survival. But Plato takes it a step further, and he believes that we actually know things, and there's a content to our knowledge even before we're born. These innate ideas, this familiarity with the world of the forms, allows us to access and remember those things, and then to utilize them in the world around us. So Plato believes that we need to access the world of the forms by using philosophy, by using reason. That's how we get to these true concepts and these true ideas that give meaning to the world around us. And so that's one of his major points there. Plato believes that people, and this is implied in what we talked about just a moment ago, people exist in kind of a dualistic nature. Metaphysically, people exist in a dualistic nature, meaning that we have body and we have soul, or the immaterial part of ourselves. And the soul, again, is the good part. The body is bad. And we reason our ways to the world of ideas by using our soul, using that non-material part of our body. Well, that's about all we're going to talk about with Plato. I will see you in the next video. Make sure that you get your the content of the book read. Make sure that you do all the work that's mentioned in the module, and we'll see you next time. Alrighty. Hello and welcome back. For the topic of this video, we're going to be discussing another one of the world's most famous philosophers. In fact, had a tremendous impact, just like Plato did, on everyone who was to come after him. This man's name is Aristotle. Aristotle lived from about 384 to 322 BC. And he has the notoriety, or he's well known for being the student of Plato. Plato, of course, started the academy and had a number of brilliant young philosophers who came and joined the academy and learned from him. None was more brilliant, at least none remembered as more brilliant than the man who is known today as Aristotle. Was known then as well as Aristotle. He studied under Plato early on in life, and then something happened when Plato passed away, or before he did. When Plato named his heir, who would take over the academy after him, many people thought, including Aristotle, that it would go to his brightest star of a pupil, that being Aristotle, of course. However, Plato passed the administration of the academy on to a nephew of his, or a relation of some sort, and then went and passed away. And Aristotle was kind of put out by this, and so he went in and started his own school that was known as the Lyceum, and he began to teach there. Now, it may be the fact that Plato was very committed to his own philosophy, and Aristotle, although he was brilliant and very bright, nonetheless disagreed fundamentally with the conclusions of his teacher Plato, whereas Plato it had a more sort of rationalist bent at knowing knowledge. Aristotle took the empiricist route, and as such that affected the rest of his philosophy and how he thought about things, and more or less disagreed with his master, his teacher, on a good number of things. Well, anyway, he was famous for having studied under Plato. Later in life, King Philip of Macedon sought out Aristotle and put him in the employ to tutor his son, the young prince Alexander. And of course, Alexander would then go on and be Alexander the Great, and was known world over for conquering most of the world that he knew about in that day. He made his way around the Mediterranean Sea and then back up into Persia and all the way to India, where his generals decided they didn't want to fight mounted troops on elephants, and that's where his conquest ended. Went back home, made it almost all the way back home, and ended up dying. And his kingdom was divided up among his 4 generals. But anyway, Alexander the Great was the pupil of Aristotle. He was tutored by Aristotle at a young age. Now, other things that Aristotle is well known for, perhaps more than anything, his greatest contribution comes from his systemization of logic. The systemization of logic. Aristotle understood that there were patterns in canons or laws by which we reason and by which we teach and by which we talk. And so he set about trying to discern what were those laws by which we think, by which we reason. This was recorded in his writings on logic, and by the way, his writings on logic are still among the most well-known treatises on the subject today. In other words, Aristotelian logic is still present and taught in many places today. So if you can come up with a philosophy that has over 2,000 years of staying power, you've probably come upon a pretty good thing, and Aristotle certainly was one who has done that. Now, there was a lot of his other stuff that really was kind of out there. Of course, he was trying to make observations with the naked eye without any sort of technology to aid him in that. And so a lot of his things on zoology or physics, what he called physics, really don't line up with what we know to be true today. But But his system of logic is second to none, even today. He also is known for trying to get at what is the cause of a thing, and causality is a thing that he wrote on. He also put together a system of virtue ethics that we'll look at, and so forth. So well known in many. He was very, very multi-talented, had many different applications of his abilities, and was a very versatile philosopher. Well, let's dive right in. The first thing I want us to look at with Aristotle is his empiricism. His empiricism. Now, if you recall, the first day of class when we talked about what do philosophers study, we took a look at epistemology. Now, epistemology is the idea that is the study of knowledge and what we know and how we can say that we have knowledge and so forth. Well, Aristotle is an empiricist. He's not the first empiricist. He certainly is not the last one, but he is of the empiricist school. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Aristotle taught on empiricism, his particular brand of it. Generically speaking, empiricism is a belief system that says that the best way to arrive at knowledge is through sense experience. Empiricism, of course, the word refers to your empirical senses, your sense of sight, smell, hearing, tasting, touching, and so forth. So Aristotle, like many many other empiricists, believed that a person started out life in this world and their mind was a blank slate, and experience would come and write on that blank slate in order to help us to gain knowledge about the world we live in, about ourselves, and pretty much about everything. Now, he does retain the use of the word form, like Plato did, and in a broad sense, he means roughly the same thing in terms of what the concept of the form accomplishes or functions as. Now, Plato, however, if you recall, Plato believed in two different worlds: the world of matter and the world of form. The world of the forms is the world that gave meaning. It was an ideal world. In other words, it did not have a physical existence. It was not material in nature. The world of the forms, according to Plato, was a world of ideas. A form was an idea that gave meaning to a lump of matter. So, for example, this lump of matter, this is a coffee mug, and this mug is made out of, I would imagine, clay or ceramic of some sort. And but this isn't just any clay or ceramic. This mug has been fashioned, or this particular lump of matter, this particular lump of clay and ceramic has been fashioned in such a way that it will fulfill a purpose. And so it has a handle that's part of the form, and the cup there that holds the liquid that gets poured into it. That is all part of the form of this. So it has matter plus form, and that equals the coffee mug. Now, Aristotle disagreed with Plato. Plato thought that the form of the cup was something that existed, the ideal coffee cup. It exists out in the world of ideas, and the person who went and made this coffee cup accessed that world of ideas and created this mug after the form that he knew of in his mind. And so he put this mug together according to that form. Aristotle disagrees. Aristotle believes that the form of the mug is actually in the object itself. You see, Aristotle was more concerned. He believed that the meaning of this mug is inherent to the mug. It's not in some disconnected world out there somewhere. It is not even subjectively in each one of our minds, but the form of the thing is in the thing itself. Now, he believed that, and since he believed that the form of a thing is in the thing itself, this led Aristotle to paying more attention to the things in the world, to try to get at their meaning. So instead of trying to reason to this perfect form of a cup in his mind, no, he would look at the object itself, examine it, look around it, weigh it, measure it, try to find out as much data as he could about the object, and derive the object's form from that. The form is inherent in the object itself. This led him to look at the world more than to try to reason his way to some transcendent form. So that's why he's an empiricist. Empiricism is basically the idea that you're gaining knowledge through your five senses. And he uses his five senses to interact with objects and try to divine their form, out of that. So that's his big break from Plato. Plato, who's a rationalist, who believes that our knowledge of the transcendent world of the forms is something that we're born with and that we have to remember. Remember, Plato believed that all knowledge is remembering. And so Aristotle says, no, all knowledge is gained from the external world. It's not accessing the world of the forms. That is the beginning and the main difference between Plato and Aristotle. The next thing that I should mention about Aristotle has to do with his metaphysics. His view of substance, his view of reality. Now, the word substance is a word that is a technical term among many philosophers. Many philosophers have an idea of what is substance. And substances basically are the things that the universe is made of. And that definition holds pretty solidly for every philosopher. But the one thing that I would point out is this. There is much disagreement on what substance or substances make up the universe. There are some, like Aristotle and Gottfried Leibniz and others, who will say that there are many different substances that make up the universe. Whereas there are others, like, for example, Baruch Spinoza, who will say that there's only one substance, that all things are one substance. And each thinker has their own explanation for why they think what they believe is the correct answer. But Aristotle believes that there are many substances, actually. Substance for Aristotle equals matter plus form. So here, let me get my handy coffee mug here again. So matter plus form. So this coffee mug is made of matter. And the matter is simply the materials that make up the coffee mug. So matter is part of the equation for what constitutes a substance. This is, like I said, made out of clay or ceramic, has some kind of glaze on it. I'm not sure exactly the processes behind it, but the material components that go into making this coffee mug a coffee mug, that's the matter that it's made of. In addition to the matter, though, this coffee mug has a form, and it's the form of a coffee mug. It's not the form of a tire. It's not the form of a doorknob. It's not the form of a window. It's the form of a coffee mug. It fulfills the purpose that a coffee mug was intended to fill, and so that's what it does. It makes a terrible hammer because it's not a hammer. So this is in substance, this is a mug. It has the matter that is made of, and it has the form that is the idea that goes into forming it. So matter plus form is a substance according to Aristotle. And by that definition alone, you can see that there are many different substances throughout the world. There are many different, so each individual object is going to be a substance in its own because it is composed by a distinct mass of matter, and it has its own particular form. So every object is a substance in and of itself, and so there are many trillions of different substances that make up the world according to Aristotle. Now, all of these substances do have some things in common, though, and this is something that is very important to understand with Aristotle. And it holds true for many of the empiricists as well, not all of them, but certainly here's what Aristotle, this is what Aristotle's version says. Substances are material objects. Aristotle is a materialist. He believes that the world can be explained by the matter that it contains, and all phenomenon can be explained in terms of those things. But substances, there may be one exception to that, which we'll talk about shortly. But substances are material objects. So everything is made of matter, has a form, therefore it's a substance. Substances are material objects according to Aristotle. He believes also that substances are external to our mind. Now, what this means is that the substance, like this coffee mug that I keep coming back to, this coffee mug does not exist in my mind. Now, this coffee mug causes my mind to have impressions of it. because the light coming off of it, I can see it, the weight of it, I can feel the texture, I can feel how hot or cold it is, I can feel that as well. And so this coffee mug causes impressions in my mind, but those impressions are not the thing itself. The mug itself is external to my mind. And so the substance of this thing is outside of my mind. Now, it is a material object, it's external to my mind, but as I said before, this substance causes sensations in our mind. And there is a direct correlation. This is the important part for Aristotle. There is a direct correlation between the substance that is outside of my mind and the sensations that it causes inside of my mind, these sensations of perception, if you will. So I'm sensing a mug that is smooth in texture because the substance of the mug is actually smooth in texture. I'm sensing a roundness in the mug because the mug itself is actually round. And so the properties that I sense in my mind have a direct correlation with the substance of this object itself. Now, there are some philosophers who will deny that, and then there are some philosophers who will challenge that. Who will say, yes, it does in some cases, but not all cases. I wanted to make clear that that's not always something that we could take for granted among philosophers. But for Aristotle, there is a one-to-one correlation between the object itself and the sensation that it causes in our mind. So he is a materialist in terms of his metaphysics. He believes that there are many substances, and he believes that those substances cause sensations in our mind. Now, let's talk about substance in reality. Substance in reality. Aristotle believes that this is a coffee mug, and this coffee mug has a form in itself. Okay, the coffee mug has a form of a coffee mug, and but there are certain qualities in this coffee mug that are not necessarily essential in order to have the form of a coffee mug. Okay, so there are some things in the coffee mug that this coffee mug has that every coffee mug has. For example, it has the ability to hold liquid of some sort. Every good coffee mug, I should say. It has the ability to hold liquid, and usually, since you're putting hot liquid in a coffee mug, most coffee mugs will have a handle that is not on the mug itself, because then you can avoid burning your hand, when the mug heats up. I don't know if you've ever been outside on a cold day and you pour some hot liquid in a cup, and sometimes you'll see people holding on to it and blowing it, and so they can get their hands warmed up or whatnot. Well, the handle is here so that you don't have to burn your hand, you don't have to get the warmth coming out. So those things are essential, really, to this coffee mug being a coffee mug. If it doesn't have those things, then it's not really a coffee mug, at least not a good one. So but this coffee mug is also white in color. Okay, is that necessary to being a coffee mug, being white in color? Well, certainly not. There are many different colors of coffee mugs. There are many different, even multicolored coffee mugs with printing on them, coffee mugs with pictures on them, and so on. So the color of this coffee mug is not necessary to the form of a coffee mug. The form of the thing, those necessary qualities are the things that make it what it is. The unnecessary qualities of this particular coffee mug are the qualities that it has, but that are not necessary for it to be a coffee mug. So that's a distinction to make in the form of this thing, because the form of this particular mug does include the color white, but that is an unnecessary quality. It doesn't have to be white in order to be a coffee mug. That's just a little distinction to make there when we're talking about forms, because the form, as we look around at different things, we recognize. So, for example, for an automobile to be an automobile, it needs to have 4 tires, or a car to be a car, rather. It needs to have 4 tires. They have a general shape to them. They have seats, a steering wheel, gas pedal, brake pedal. Some of them have a clutch. And so all of these things are different qualities of an automobile. And therefore, when we see those necessary qualities in an object, our mind automatically goes to automobile. The color of it is incidental. And sometimes the shape of it is incidental. But there are qualities that make a thing what they are, and then there are qualities that are just superficial, and they are not necessary to make a thing what it is. Okay, so those are some things about Aristotle's metaphysic, at least as it relates to substance and form. The next thing I want to look at with Aristotle is his study into the realm of causality. Aristotle believed that all things have a cause, and as he looks around into the world, again, he's one of these guys who likes to look around the world, investigate. He likes to gather data and just see how things operate in the world. And one of the things that he notices is that everything has a cause. Everything that he sees, everything that he experiences, everything that in this world that he sees around him has a cause. In other words, it can be explained in terms of something else. It has a cause. And Aristotle breaks it down to, he wonders about causality, and he breaks the concept of causality into 4 distinct categories of causes that can explain a thing. For example, the first type of cause that Aristotle articulates, the first one he talks about, is that of the material cause. And the material cause of a thing is basically the materials or the things that go into making it. So it's when you can explain a thing by referring to what it's made of. And so if you think of an automobile, you think of steel and aluminum and glass and rubber and plastic, cloth and foam and things like this. The car has many material components. And so that would be said, those material components would be said to be that thing's material cause. It explains the object in terms of what it is composed of, what it's made of. After the material cause, Aristotle believes in what is known as an efficient cause. Now, when we explain things, when we talk about a thing, we do oftentimes refer to its material cause, what it's made out of. We also refer many times to a thing's efficient cause. An efficient cause explains a thing in reference to who or what caused it to come into being, who created it, who made it. And so if we're talking about a Ford, if I'm talking about my truck, then you could say, well, Ford is responsible. Ford is the efficient cause of it because the Ford Motor Company may have put it together, right? If we're talking about any kind of object, every kind of object has an efficient cause. So there's the material cause, the efficient cause, and the next one is what is known as the formal cause. The formal cause seeks to explain a thing in reference to its form. And remember, the form is sort of the big idea that defines or explains what a thing is. So a formal cause explains a thing in terms of its form, rather. So if we look at the same vehicle, I would say it's a truck because it has the form of a truck. I'm not going into an explanation of what all the particulars are, what kind of engine it has, what kind of transmission, what's it geared at, what's the gear ratio on it, what size of bed or anything like that. I'm just going at this point and saying it has the form of a truck, and so when you look at it, you can tell that it's a truck because it has that form, that general makeup, that build of a truck. So there's the material cause, the efficient cause, the formal cause, and then there's the final cause. The final cause really gets at something of what Aristotle believes about the nature of reality. You see, because Aristotle believes that all things have a purpose, and the word that he would use for that is a telos. Everything is teleological. It has a purpose. And so a final cause explains a thing in terms of the purpose that it fulfills. And Aristotle believes that everything, whether it's been man-made or whether it's found in nature, everything has a purpose. All things have a final cause. And so he says a final cause is an explanation of what a thing's purpose is. So there's the material cause, the efficient cause, the formal cause, and the final cause. And those are the four aspects of causation or causality that Aristotle would articulate. Well, we've had a lot to look at in this video. Aristotle is a wide-ranging, very versatile philosopher. He's written on a number of things that are still even relevant today, or at least worthy of our consideration today. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your interest. Make sure that you do the reading that is assigned in the syllabus, and then we will see you in the next session. Alrighty, thank you.